Today we begin with a new full measure poll on the national media. As you might expect, the results aren't very good for the media. Whether it's coverage of the Russia investigation or the Covington High School kids, news consumers on all sides of the political spectrum report declining trust in us. We turn to two experts to analyze the current media madness.
The president addresses the nation.
Hopefully, we can rise above partisan politics in order.
One need only sample lowlights from last January to get a sense of the problem. A Seattle Fox affiliate aired a doctored video of President Trump.
The comparison shows Trump with an altered face and a looped licking of his lips.
And a January article about Melania Trump in The Telegraph was followed by 7 corrections, an apology, and an undisclosed payment to Mrs. Trump. One-sided narratives presented virtually unchallenged. National news quoting anonymous sources that turn out to be wrong. Also in January, there was a BuzzFeed bombshell.
The headline contains the most devastating part. President Trump directed his attorney to lie to Congress.
But special counsel Robert Mueller quickly refuted the story. The Washington Post took us inside the battle over Trump's immigration order, only to later admit the article misreported Trump's actions. A reported meeting had not actually occurred, and a conference call hadn't happened as described. FBI Director James Comey debunked a New York Times article about supposed contacts between Trump campaign staff and senior Russian intelligence officials.
In the main, it was not true.
And NBC News reported that Russian President Putin said he had compromising information about Trump. Actually, Putin said the opposite. It's been a bad few years for media credibility. A new poll conducted for Full Measure by Scott Rasmussen finds 42% of Americans believe national political news coverage is inaccurate and unreliable. Fewer, 38%, believe it is accurate and reliable. And 52% say it's worse compared to 5 years ago. National political reporters also get poor scores. Only 26% of those polled say reporters carefully report the facts. 57% say reporters use news stories to promote their own ideological agenda. Pollster Scott Rasmussen.
We asked about national political reporters. Are they credible? Are they reliable? And, a little more than 1 out of 3 people say yes. When we ask about Wikipedia, we get the exact same answer. So what's happening is we have a world where people look at journalists like they look at Wikipedia. Gee, that's an interesting fact. I better check it myself.
And what does that tell you?
The media has a huge credibility problem, and it's always had the problem. We talk about it differently today. Now we talk about it as a political bias. I think the issues have always been there. I mean, people were complaining about the bias of Walter Cronkite back in the 1960s.
People forget about that.
Yep.
For it seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate.
It is often argued that Donald Trump created this media environment where everybody hates the media. And then others say he simply understood that environment and capitalized on it. Which is it you see?
Oh, people have hated the media for a very long time.
Fake news, folks, fake news. What's your message? Typical New York Times fake stories.
Donald Trump capitalized on that. He understood it, but he's not the first to do so. The first President Bush, when he was campaigning, he actually got kind of aggressive with, I think it was Dan Rather, during an interview because a lot of Republicans weren't sure he had the fire to be president.
It's not fair to judge my whole career by a rehash on Iran. How would you like it if I judged your career by those 7 minutes when you walked off the set in New York? Well, now, would you like that?
Mr. Vice President. So he capitalized on that, but all they are doing is tapping into sentiment that's already there, and Donald Trump is playing the media beautifully.
Rasmussen says his polling found a good recent example of how many today have come to regard or disregard the national media. The Covington High School pro-life students' confrontation with a Native American activist at a Washington, D.C. protest.
When the story broke of the students from Covington High School, we went out and polled right away when the story first broke and asked people what they thought. And as you would expect, liberals and conservatives had different views of whether the high school students acted inappropriately or somebody else did.
So to summarize, liberals probably thought the high school students who were pro-life behaved inappropriately and aggressively.
Yes.
And conservatives thought the Native American was the one who was inappropriate.
Yes. And by the way, conservatives also thought the media was inappropriate.
A group of teenagers, some Catholic high school students, seen wearing Make America Great Again hats, appearing to face off with Nathan Phillips, a 65-year-old Native American.
And then we had a week full of coverage. And as you recall, there was a lot more coverage that came out about the incident.
Our boys did nothing, no violence.
A lot more videos and a lot more information.
Viral video have the
And a week later, nobody's opinion changed.
I'm surprised by that because some reporters and in the media even apologized that they had been too hard on the children at first or the high school students without knowing the full story.
So many people admitted they made snap judgments before these other facts came in.
But you're saying the public at large didn't change their mind.
That's correct. The public at large made up their mind. They knew their sources.
But the most overwhelming poll results came when we asked about the motivation of political reporters.
78% of voters say that what reporters do with political news is promote their agenda. They think they use incidents as props for their agenda rather than seeking to accurately record what happened. The report
That's a huge number.
Yeah. Only 14% think that a journalist is actually reporting what happened.
Most people seem to think reporters cannot be fair when it comes to their chosen political candidate.
If a reporter found out something that would hurt their favorite candidate, only 36% of voters think that they would report that.
So most people think the reporter would cover it up because they like the person.
Right, exactly. So voters are looking at them as a political activist, not as a source of information.
An actual reporter, professional reporter, would never do that.
Frank Sesno is a former CNN correspondent and bureau chief. As head of the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University, he routinely confronts declining public trust in the media.
The public understands fundamentally what journalism should be. They don't understand how it's actually practiced. And that falls to news organizations, in my view, to be more creative, more imaginative about how they're engaging with their publics, to both explain what they do, to defend what they do when it's controversial, and to be accountable for what they do if it's wrong.
After 2016, when so many of us got the election so wrong, we promised a period of self-reflection and correction. Have we done it?
No, not enough. If we had done the self-reflection and correction better and more deeply, there would be more reporters reporting from more places across the country, talking to more diverse audiences. We would not be so entirely focused, at least in certain media channels and places, on the Trump administration and the outrage of the moment. That being said, there is so much news from this administration. It's kind of hard not to do that.
If we don't get what we want, I will shut down the government.
Okay.
In the era of the Trump presidency, can you point to a couple of things you think the media has done right?
I would start actually in the Trump era by calling out NPR. I think NPR has done an exceptional job getting outside of Washington, engaging other voices and people from different sides of the ideological divide to get their sense of what's happening. I would call out the New York Times and the Washington Post for making remarkable use of multimedia. So there's a lot of good journalism and good media that's taking place also that extends beyond the Trump administration. There is such a thing as beyond the Trump administration.
It may not seem like it as we move quickly into campaign 2020. I guess we should warn people, hang on to their seatbelt with 2020 campaign coming. What do you foresee in terms of media?
Yeah, so here's the next danger. The next danger is everybody walks right off the cliff of coverage, like they did last time, obsessing over, the candidate du jour, the moment du jour. How will the media be able to arbitrate this mass of people who all want to be president so that the audience can follow it with some degree of clarity, and so that you neither fall into an oversimplified narrative or a narrative that just revolves around the melodrama of who's up, who's down, and who's making the most noise or tweeting the most?
By the way, you can find my list of media mistakes in the era of Trump at SharylAttkisson.com.